Okay, well, it is 5 after 5:30, so we will go ahead and get started. Um, as attendees pop on, we will be recording this so folks can catch it after the fact, and we do have it we're Zooming, but on Facebook Live as well. Um, so without further ado, good evening and welcome, and thank you for joining our TRED Talk this evening. I am Jessica Carlsruher, Executive Director of TRED Coalition, and will be your moderator. I'm a sixth-generation Texan and proud to be advocating for landowners and helping protect their private property rights. For those of you who aren't familiar with TRED, the acronym stands for the Texas Real Estate Advocacy and Defense Coalition. We are a nonpartisan, member-based organization that educates, advocates for, and defends landowners in the rural communities they live in at the local, state, and federal levels. I've put some contact information in the chat box located on the right-hand side. This is also where you can submit questions to our panelists, and we will be addressing those questions at the end of the panel discussion. TRED Talks is our newest educational programming that we rolled out last March to connect landowners, experts, the legislature, and the general public on issues that are affecting rural landowners across the state. Our programming covers issues including water, eminent domain, public health, education, conservation, and parks, which brings us to tonight's discussion on Big Bend. Know before you go. So our goal for this evening is to discuss the resource limitations and challenges the Big Bend region parks face during high tourism demand and how you can recreate responsibly with it when visiting the Big Bend area. And so with us this evening are three seasoned panelists on this issue. We have Rick Goopman, Chief Ranger of Big Bend National Park, Amber Harrison, Park Ranger and Interpreter, Big Bend Ranch State Park and Big Bend Conservation Alliance board member, and Chris Ruggia, Director of Tourism, City of Alpine. So thank you all for being with us here this evening and welcome.
Hello, thanks.
Thank you.
So without further ado, let's just jump into it. So tourism in the Big Bend area has been increasing considerably with both the Big Bend National Park and Big Bend Ranch State Park setting visitation records year after year, even during the pandemic, and probably even more so. So each of you have had a chance, each of you had a chance to tell a visitor three things they needed to know about their upcoming trip, what would they be on that list? Amber, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, with regard to Big Bend Ranch State Park, I think one of the first things I would want to do is set visitor expectations about what our park is. A lot of people come down to Big Bend Ranch with the expectation of it being like Big Bend National Park or like a typical national park where there's, developed roads and cabins and maybe Wi-Fi, maybe, access to other resources, fully staffed, those sorts of things. But really what's important is that Big Bend Ranch State Park is more of a wilderness experience. We have never intended to develop into that sort of what we think of Big Bend National Park or a lot of those other more developed parks. We only have one paved highway or one paved road, which is the highway that goes from basically Lajitas to Presidio, and then all of the rest of the interior of the park is unpaved. The main road is really well maintained, but a lot of the roads are even not maintained at all. A lot of our campsites, the majority of our campsites are located in really remote and rugged areas. So I think making sure that people do their research and understand beforehand what we actually offer, and trying to find out the differences between the two parks. If they've been, going to Big Bend National Park, but never really had, a chance to come to Big Bend Ranch, and they want to explore it, just, requesting that they're asking of them to do that research. We've definitely had an uptick in, for example, RVs, large like motorhomes, and a lot of people, they just didn't look, they didn't know, and they get there and they get stranded, or they damage their vehicle, or they don't have a place to stay because we don't have hookups and water, and power and all of those sorts of things that they've come to expect from other locations. So I would say recognizing that we're a primitive wilderness experience rather than a more developed park. Then I would say, with knowing that, to be prepared to be 100% self-supportive, supportive. When you're camping, when you're on the trails, when you're in the backcountry, because in some cases, assistance could be days away. If you're in the remote backcountry and you have an injury or an illness or some other issue, there are parts of the park that could take literally days to get to you. So just knowing that you need to be able to be supported, not only necessarily in the park, but in the region. We have power outages all the time. We have, weather issues. We have these things where people can get stranded. Even if you're in a populated, developed part of the area, you might not have cell coverage. You might not have a way to get a hold of anybody if you need help. So being able to self-support. And I would say the third thing, and this goes back to my first point, is doing your research not only about the expectations of the park, but in terms of the weather and road conditions and those sorts of things. If you give us a call and you ask us our opinion about what they should and shouldn't do based maybe upon the time of the year and weather, and we say it's hot, you should probably wait, then take our advice and maybe wait. Or come up, work with us to come up with an alternate plan if it's not what your expectations were. So I would say the third thing is always listen to your rangers when you call and ask them for advice. So being prepared, one of the leave no trace components. So
Great, Chris.
Well, I guess I should let you all know that Alpine is a ways north from these two parks, and so our experience in Alpine is a little buffered. We're seeing a lot of traffic in Alpine, but not as much. The impact is not as much on Alpine specifically as it is on the communities immediately near the national and state parks, that being Studi Butte, Terlingua, Lajitas. And so I spoke to Robert Alvarez, who's my counterpart at Visit Big Bend with Brewster County, who he represents those areas. So I'll sort of give you his answers as well as mine when we're talking about these things. And what we agreed on is the three things would be plan, plan, and plan. Because just as Amber said, if folks come and wing it, people come into the Alpine Visitor Center telling our tourism coordinator that they're planning to go to South County and find a place to stay that night, and that's not going to happen. So what we're trying to do jointly between Alpine and Brewster County is communicate to folks before they come so that they have a good experience, because we don't want them to, as Amber pointed out, we don't want them to come and find themselves out of their depth. They're experiencing things they didn't expect, and they have a bad time. And so we're sending people to visit alpinetx.com for those resources, and also visitbigbend.com is the Brewster County site, which has a lot of resources about what you can expect and the amenities that are there immediately around the national parks.
Great. And then Rick? Oh, we can't hear you. We had you before. Maybe while Rick addresses the audio, we can talk about, maybe let's back up and even talk about the difference between the two parks and how you all work in tandem with each other, and maybe what some of the differences are between the two when you're visiting them.
Yeah, so, well, one of the first big differences is the size. Big is big, but there is a difference. The national park is somewhere in the neighborhood of 800,000 acres. The state park is in the neighborhood of, excluding Chinati Mountain State Natural Area, is about 315,000 acres. One of the big differences I think that really impacts us coming into this time of year is that the national park has an entire mountain range contained within it. That's a couple thousand feet higher in elevation. So it's much cooler. They have a different ecology, different environment that lends itself to more summertime, warmer months. You know, people can get up into the Chisos Basin and still this time of year have a pretty comfortable outdoor experience. But that's not the case in the state park. So for example, when the fire was happening a couple of weeks ago, we had a bunch of people coming and wanting to do their backcountry trips in the state park, but it was so much hotter. But people didn't realize that. And so, you know, we had to really work with them. Again, going back to that notion of expectation, really understanding what and setting people up for success by lining out their expectations. So that's a big, in terms of the impact on visitors, that's a big component, is just having that different ecological system to work with that they have that we don't. And a lot of people just aren't schooled in thinking about topography or terrain or geography or that sort of thing when they're coming out to have an adventure. A lot of people do, of course, but there are a lot of people who it's just not part of the equation for them, and that's understandable because it's an experience thing. You know, one of the things that's happening lately is we're getting an uptick in people who don't really have experience in the outdoors. So that is definitely a thing that's not even on their radar at all. So they're not thinking about those sorts of things. They're thinking about, you know, where do I get water, or how to carry all my food, but they're not thinking about their sort of environmental or situational awareness. Are you back on? I could. That's a long-winded. There's a lot of answers to that. So,
Can we have you back?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
All right. Sorry about that. I logged in early to try and make sure that didn't happen. I sincerely apologize.
No worries.
Right. So just thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. Good evening, good afternoon to everyone. So going back to the three things I would tell people, so I'll echo what Amber said. I mean, you're going to hear the same themes over and over. I love to go to Big Bend Ranch State Park because it's not Big Bend National Park. And you'll hear the differences, I think, over and over. So what I always tell people, come physically and mentally prepared. You know, we do have our own mountain range. So you can get up to 5,000 feet, but most of that 800,000 acres is desert. And so it's flat. It's out there, it's hot. So do your homework. Again, you're going to hear that over and over. It really is true. You need to understand where you're coming to. This is a fantastic area to come to, but you need water, you need sun protection. So you've got to do your homework. One way to do that is through the websites, the National Park, Big Bend National Park website, Big Bend Ranch State Park website. We've got the National Park Service app, and then, as you heard, Brewster County has all their websites that are very useful and very helpful. They're all aimed at helping people best enjoy their time here and get the most out of it and do it safely. And I would urge, plan on staying at least 3 days. There's just no way. This area is massive. I mean, Brewster County takes hours just to drive across. It is a huge area. There's a lot to see. Give yourself enough time so you're not rushing through, and do more than just the highlight areas. So as everybody alluded to, we've got a mountain range. You can go up to 5,000 feet, but you'd be shocked to learn that everybody wants to go up into the Chisos Basin where it's cool. And all summer long, that's where everyone will be headed because it's really hot everywhere else. So do your homework. Well, I'll echo that one and plan ahead.
Great. Well, so how have operations changed in your line of work to mitigate some of the challenges with increased tourism? And I'll start with you, Chris.
Okay, well, the main thing that we're doing both in Alpine and Brewster County is adapting the messaging as conditions change and trying to let people know when things are full. In fact, one thing, this isn't really the case in Alpine. Alpine still has some occupancy buffer. You know, we can accommodate some more people than we have, but that's not really the case in South County on any given day. And so, especially in the spring, one thing I was surprised to learn is that Brewster County, they're not marketing in the first quarter at all right now because the pressure on the services are at their maximum already. And so that's a big change is looking at changing when, how, and where we communicate and invite people to the area. One other thing that's on the table in Brewster County that, but it has yet to be decided, they're looking at investing some of their money in visitor centers and things like that, of enhancing the experience of the folks who are here and reducing the percentage of monies that go out to inviting new people to come in, because we're down south, South County, we're pretty maxed out a lot of the time.
And what about some of the other towns in the surrounding area? You have people who are visiting those and visiting Big Bend? Are they isolated instances, or is that really part of the impact of the additional traffic?
Well, you know, people tend to circulate around the area. There's a lot of people, because as people develop their relationship with the region, most of the time that starts with the national park. And then over years, they become more familiar with the other communities, and they might decide their home base is going to be Marathon, or their home base is going to be Marfa or Alpine. And then they'll take their trip and stay in one of these different places, and they'll always hit the park, you know, on the trip, but it varies. And there's other folks who, the national park or the state park is going to be their home when they're here, and that's never going to change. But so people circulate around a lot, and as Rick was saying, that a lot of times these are longer trips so that people can really enjoy all the different areas, because every different town has a different personality, and of course the parks, it's an investment that pays off, you know, to experience them in full.
And so for those locals who are coming to the parks, what things do they even need to know about how the park operates and what might have changed?
Are you asking me again, or?
Well, just any of you.
Yeah, somebody else.
Probably Amber and Rick.
I would say for our locals, one of the things that's newish for us is that we are now able to, our visitors are now able to get their day use permits online. So that's for our locals who are already oriented to the park and already know exactly what they want to do. That's one way that they can circumvent coming up to, you know, the Bart Warnock Center, coming to one of the visitor centers and having to wait in line or whatever just to get a permit, even though they already know exactly where they're going and what they're doing. So that's a new thing for us that I don't think a lot of our locals know about for whatever reason. I think a lot of just the pandemic time, just people haven't been coming, and we've gotten, you know, that system's working a little smoother now. So in terms of what our locals can do, I think that's one thing. I don't really think there's too much else that our locals should or could do differently. You know, if they have an annual pass, they know how to use the self-pay station, or you know, just let us know sort of on the side that they're there, and you know, we can just process them a little quicker, because we usually recognize them and we know what they're doing. So but I would say the online system is one of our biggest operational changes. It's really been a benefit.
And Rick?
Yeah, so I'll start in that same spot. So we also went to a permitting system. We used to be first come, first serve for our camping, and based on cash and COVID and everything else, we've gone to an online reservation system. So in many respects, the first time I came here on vacation, we couldn't find a camping spot because I didn't do my homework and I came in March, and it's first come, first serve. So it's important to know that all that stuff is online, and we're busier. So our campsites are booked through July, which is kind of insane to think about. But we're busier than we normally are, and so that means that, especially on the Terlingua side, through the Maverick entrance station, there's regular waits because we were built a long time ago before we had 500,000 people a year coming here. So we have entrance stations, and especially for locals who are used to coming in, there's only one road in and one road out. And so you should expect to have to wait in a way that you likely never had to at any other time other than spring break before. So that's a significant change. A lot of our facilities have restricted access or are still closed for COVID. The most significant one is the Boquillas Port of Entry has been closed since March of 2020. So Department of Homeland Security still has the recreational travel ban. They have not lifted that since last year. And so that's a huge thing. Many of us went to Boquillas on a fairly regular basis. That was a fun, easy trip to go. Instead of going through Presidio, you could go down there, right across the river. So that's still closed, and I know that has a big impact on some of the local community. So we obviously hope it'll open soon, but we have no control over that. That's a national thing that's happening. And again, those facilities, the lodge, the restaurant is takeout only. They're operating about 75% capacity, and our visitor centers are still outside. So lots of things that look a little different for folks that would come on a regular basis. And I think the last thing, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'd like to just add to those points. One being the waiting. One thing that is happening in our park, and I believe it's going to be over maybe the next 2 years or so, is they're along FM 170. They're doing some road construction and some bridge repairs. And I've heard that the waits have been really long, and that both locals and visitors need to be aware that if they're trying to get between Lajitas and Presidio, I think one of our rangers who lives in Presidio was stuck for nearly an hour at the end of the day, and I understand that to be a fairly regular thing. And then they've also had some technical issues with their lighting system that tells you when you can and can't go. So hopefully that'll be resolved, but to build that into your expectations as well. And I also wanted to point out that we are also operating sort of with a walk-up window. So our indoor space is still not open to the public. We have all the merchandise is for sale. Everything's normal. It's just it's a little slower because you do have the window, so we have to go to the window and then scamper over to the register and do the purchasing and all of that stuff. But when it's busy, that can slow things down. So just wanted to point out those two similar things that are happening at our park as well.
Well, and I know that there are many outdoor spaces, watering holes, and things like that have gone to a permitting system because of the influx of people moving to Texas, but then also just, using all of those spaces. And some of them have limitations on the amount of people who can come each day. So when you're getting a permit at one of these parks, is there a limitation, or is it unlimited and then people just wait their turn, or how does that kind of work, so people know more about that?
That's a really good question. In the state park system, a lot of the parks do have daily caps in terms of their day use permits. So that's a frequent question that we get from visitors. Our park is giant, so we don't have any caps or anything. So no day use there's no issue with that at our park.
Yeah, so we also don't have a cap on visitors. That would be interesting to try and quantify in something this size. But we do have an 8-person group limit. That's still one of those COVID mitigations that's been in effect that impacts river trips, that impacts a lot of different things that people do. So there's an 8-person group limit. But as far as coming here and getting out and exploring, our zone camping, that never fills up. People that want to just pick an area, a couple hundred acres, 1,000 acres, and just kind of go explore and camp overnight. Even in March, that'll never fill up. So there's incredible opportunities for people that plan and want to get off the pavement and actually go for a hike.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to toss in just about the local question, that as a local who's not right next to the park, our experience of the park is day trips, and the local community gets used to where the edges are of the busy season. When things are we have this rhythm of, oh, if we go at this time, that's when there's not going to be anybody on that particular trail. But one thing we're finding, that's not the case anymore. All of those edges are filling in. So that's something that the local people need to it sinks in over time. You come up against more people than you expected on that trail. I've never seen them here at this time of year, but that's our situation now.
Well, and we touched on some of the, I guess, the specifics with COVID, but is there anything in addition that visitors need to know when coming to the region about engaging with small communities in Big Bend, either regarding COVID or even beyond that have kind of set a new precedent?
Well, speaking to Alpine and to the communities near the parks, the main thing we would say right now is bring your mask and pay attention to each business that you're entering, because there's no statewide requirements at the moment. And so it really is on a business to business basis. So you're going to want to do what makes you feel safe and comfortable, be aware of the people around you, and particularly just as you approach a business that you haven't been into yet, have your mask with you, be ready to put it on, and look for a sign at the door or ask somebody. Because I would say about the vast majority of businesses are requesting folks to wear masks inside, and about half are requiring it. And so there's some latitude right now compared to a lot of other places, but that's what we're seeing on the ground right now.
And have there been any other, procedures or things implemented just moving forward, even beyond the pandemic? Just as like a precaution. I'm just curious.
I would say you might see in some government offices some, but I don't know that going forward we'll really see too much difference once things are settled, which of course they aren't yet.
Well, so what are the top resource impacts that you are seeing due to the increased visitation?
I can speak to that. I've just made a little list. One is driving off of the roadway. That being both off of the paved highway as well as in the back country on our dirt roads and things like that. One of the things that's happening, and I think it's a function of the pandemic, but people are buying and coming out here with travel trailers, and small contained units, and larger RVs. But what's happening is that our campsites and our roads aren't designed for those. And so in order to turn something large like that around, for example, people are driving off the roadways. People are taking a small designated area for a single campsite, and they're parking off of, in the bushes. And we're having, a lot of campsite creep. So now all of a sudden you can fit 4 or 5 vehicles in where there was really only intended to be 1 or 2. And so they'll unhitch their trailer and then scoot it back, because a lot of those little teardrop trailers and things, the smaller ones are easily, you can unhitch them and kind of move them around, and they'll, back them into the vegetation. They'll take the picnic table out from underneath the shade shelter and put their small trailer under that, and just lots of weird little modifications where they're bringing everything with them. They're bringing multiple vehicles, all of this gear, and they're just spreading out. And so off the roadway and off sort of the campsites is becoming a really big problem. So that's obviously doing damage to our natural resources, as well as some of our, we have cultural resources that most people don't recognize as such and that are there, and that causes damage to those as well. One other thing that we're seeing with regard to our natural resources is this strange phenomenon where people are painting rocks. They'll go and gather rocks of all sizes and paint them and put their hashtags on them or whatever messages, and just leave them all over the park. That and like stacking rocks, making rock herons, and it's a thing that's happening everywhere. It's kind of strange. We've also, had a number of incidences where, people are looting plants, taking cactus, those sorts of things. And then, I think the other really big one is an uptick in litter, mostly toilet paper and human waste along the trails or on the trails, in the campsite. That's a new thing for us. I think personally, a lot of that has to do with going back to what we talked about earlier about the experience level of people. I was actually at a campsite the other day, and that has a composting toilet, and there's a big boulder just behind that. And I was wandering around, and behind that boulder is a heap of toilet paper. So people, instead of going into, and maybe this is related to COVID, and they don't feel comfortable going into the designated toilet, and instead they're just going in the desert and not, they're leaving their toilet paper behind and other waste. And it's a thing that's definitely increased significantly over the past year and a half, I would say. So those are some major, those are resource damages that we've always had, but the scale of them, and I think the density of them is definitely increasing significantly.
I want to echo, it's funny, I want to assure you that Amber and I did not prepare notes in advance with each other. So my number one resource impact is toilet paper all over along our most popular trails. Without question, we've never seen that before. That is not something that we have experienced, but on our most popular trails, it is very likely that you will be walking along and find a pile of toilet paper. I hadn't made the COVID connection. That makes perfect sense. I appreciate Amber kind of taking it one step further, that people don't want to use those things. So, and it's curious, there's a question in the chat box specifically asking about that. Are we looking at requiring people to bring portable toilets into the backcountry? And the answer is no, not right now. We do require it on the river. You have to take a groover with you, but not into the backcountry areas. We'd like to have more education. And again, just kind of echoing what Amber said, that the impacts we're seeing do seem to be from first-time folks, that this is their first time coming down to this part of the world. Maybe they're newer to hiking, maybe they're newer to camping. And so the resource violations are, some of them may be entirely unintentional without thinking about those long-term impacts. We're talking about painted rocks. I mean, that's a huge issue. We have just plain old graffiti in some of our most sensitive cultural sites, with historic I always get it wrong, petroglyphs and pictographs. I always say it backwards. And now we're getting graffiti, modern graffiti on some of those sites. People adding their piece. So as far as the resource stuff, more traffic on high use trails. So just that impact of thousands more people than normal. And that increased use by folks that are still learning how to, maybe what some of those best practices are. And then the last thing, just kind of going backwards to the question about kind of the COVID and folks coming to this area. One of the things I would say that's so critical for us is remembering that Big Bend Regional Medical Center is it for a really large area. So when you get hurt out here, Alpine is our lifeline. So we've got our ambulance, we have Terlingua Fire and EMS, we have transport facilities, but we have a really good, but really small regional medical center that cares for not only the community, but everyone who comes here and needs medical attention. So that is something that everyone really should consider. Our EMS calls have definitely increased during COVID and not COVID related. We didn't transport a single COVID related patient. These are all just normal park related injuries. And that's a significant increase on the hospital there in Alpine.
Yeah, on the services side, in terms of that resource and the impact there, the most obvious one, especially in the towns near the parks, Studi Butte, Terlingua, Lajitas, is just the pressure on the food service establishments. It's very difficult right now to get a meal in a timely manner. That's a limited resource in these tiny little towns, and that's something that people really need to be aware of when they're trying to plan each day of their trip, and really maybe think about picnicking or timing your meals as best you can to avoid those rushes, because that's pretty significant. And then obviously just the lodging, and that it's not possible to walk in and get a room in the southern part of Brewster County. You can get lucky in some of the towns in Marathon, Alpine, Fort Davis, Marfa. That can happen, but it's almost unheard of right now down near the park.
Okay. Yeah, I'd also like to add, like in Terlingua, for example, we just have few options for eating out or bars or any of that kind of stuff. So there's always really long waits, and just a lot of people, a lot of traffic. And then the other thing is people don't realize how far it is. If they're staying out on Terlingua Ranch, or they're staying in Lajitas, or they've got they're at the Starlight and they've still got a 30-40 minute drive back to their campsite or whatever. And once you leave the ghost town and you head out towards Lajitas or down 170 or up 118, it's dark and it's pretty dangerous. So I find that a lot of people don't realize that. They'll come from Terlingua Ranch to the park and talk about, oh, they want to go to Presidio or into the park, and then they want to come back and go to the Starlight or eat in Lajitas, and then get back out to Terlingua Ranch Lodge. And especially in the winter time when our daylight's pretty limited, I just have to reiterate that the safety of that is in and of itself is pretty sketchy, because the River Road FM 170 is not a fun place to drive at night. So I don't know if there's been an increase in issues with law enforcement or accidents or anything. I can imagine there probably is. I don't personally know any of those statistics, but that's a thing, again, going back to planning, that I think catches a lot of people off guard. And bringing your own food and like Chris said, to picnic and to plan to kind of self-support is the better I think option, especially if you're limited with time. So just
well, and with the increased foot traffic in the parks and in the area in general, have you seen an uptick in just the weekends, or is it now you're dealing with an influx on a daily basis?
I think I've never sensed a weekend thing in our park. I think because it's so far away, it's not really a weekend getaway. So people, what I think the trend is more like Thursdays, we start to kind of get busier through like Monday. So it's kind of a longer time span, but I don't personally really pick up on too much of a trend that I think is real. Maybe Thursdays seem busy because of other reasons, but I think it's pretty much every day these days.
Yeah, Alpine the weekends are absolutely busier because we do get those little weekend getaways. But I think the closer to the parks you get, it spreads out through the week for sure.
I think one of the things Chris specifically mentioned is, we used to get that big activity from Alpine, from the local communities, people coming down to do the day hikes, and we still get a volume of that. But it's interesting, just since COVID, we've started, or I've had access to the daily numbers, and I'm always shocked, during our busiest times. Tuesday will be the busiest day of the week, not Saturday or Sunday. So I have not been able to come up with a pattern, but our weekdays, we traditionally staff up for the weekends, and we've had to really look at that model because our weekdays are just as busy as the weekends.
We should probably compare notes on that sometime and see what we can glean out of that. If we can find any trends.
Absolutely.
Or just be prepared every day.
Right. Well, we've seen a lot in the media about different types of tourism, like sustainable tourism and regenerative tourism. So when each of you think about the future of tourism in the region, what does that opportunity look like?
So I'll jump up quick because this is kind of my, I don't know, this is my soapbox. So not many people know outside of the region that Big Bend National Park has a landfill in the park, and that everything that every visitor brings into the park goes into a hole in the ground inside of the national park here. It's our third landfill over the, whatever number that is, 70, 80 years the park has been here. And it's filling up again. So what we're really going to be advocating for, what we need to focus on is that sustainable visit, that zero landfill impact visit. And all of this comes back to planning ahead. You've got to plan your visit and not bring a 24 pack of plastic bottles. You need to bring gallon jugs of water because you need to be drinking gallons, not small bottles anyway. We're setting ourselves up with water filling stations and trying to encourage those kinds of things and encourage people to really think about what you're bringing to the park, plan ahead, think about that waste stream because it's a Brewster County issue. It's not just a Big Bend National Park issue. So we're going to be pushing that kind of zero landfill impact initiative, thinking about your vacations down here. And I think we're probably going to see some variation of volunteerism, vacationism, this longer trips down here, and maybe those opportunities for us in the parks to really capitalize on some of those long trips and figure out how to use that to help address some of these resource damage issues while we have these large groups or just individuals that want to stay longer and help out.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of echo that waste management issue, not only in the park, but in the community. We have, I don't know how many, 175 Airbnb short-term rentals alone. That doesn't include, and that was just Terlingua. That doesn't include all of the other platforms, all the other communities. So that's a lot of waste management. That's a lot of waste generation. Waste management, I think our other major issue, and this is a community level issue that potentially will affect our visitors is water management. We don't really, as far as I understand, we don't really know a whole lot about our quantity and quality of water resources. And so, you got at least 170, units, short-term rentals, flipping laundry, and, there are a couple of them that are now putting in little pools and things like that, I think we're really going to have to consider managing those resources from the parks perspective and the notion of water. One of the things that we're having to start to think about is our spring health and our, the health of our natural water sources. One of the things about Big Bend Ranch that sets us apart a little bit from the national park is the amount of natural water sources that we have, the number of springs, and that gives people the ability to self-sustain in the backcountry a lot longer. Well, if more and more people are doing that and are accessing those springs, which are fairly small resources or locations at some point, we'll need to start thinking about how we're going to manage that water resource and how we're going to manage those sorts of things. So I like the idea of the sort of the volunteer vacationism. I think that's probably a direction that will go eventually, provided that we have the staff to manage something like that. Because having a small program of volunteers takes in and of itself is kind of a full-time job. So you want to pair that with managing resources or some sort of sustainability angle, then you need the manpower as well to do that. So definitely things I think that we're starting to think about both in the parks and on the community level.
Well, and maybe this is an opportunity to kind of do a PSA on the impacts of, changing some of the environment, moving the rocks with some of the waste, so people kind of know what that real impact is, and an opportunity to kind of encourage folks to use resources that are readily available to them, and then, go to the website, your Facebook page, all of those other news and media sources, so they know how to kind of navigate some of those things. Obviously, if you're in a pinch, you're in a pinch, but just really kind of what that true impact is on the region for people who want to continue to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good kind of evidence-based way to get the message out. I think that would be very useful, but first we've got to figure out how to reach people, because I feel like we try social media, we try signage, we try all of these things, but they're not getting the message. The message is not getting out there. So we haven't figured out the magic formula to even get them at, like, if we could find a way to get the message, to get people to pay attention to it, and we could put in those evidence-based examples to bring it home to them. And I think it's a really great method, but I have not unlocked the secret of getting people to pay attention. So I don't know what, maybe at the national park they've tried, but I don't feel like
Amber,
social media is very, I don't think the social media is very successful, but I don't know, maybe.
I think, Amber, a lot of what you're seeing though is the fact that it's like for a long time, a community had built up that had built this relationship with these places in these parks. And they were, as you pointed out, they had experience in and out with being out of doors, and they knew what to do and not to do for the most part. And so we've had so many new people. So it's basically a ground level, rearing of a whole generation of people who don't know. And so I think it will have to be a long-term thing. And and the only tool that I have and that Visit Big Bend have is messaging. And so that's something where if we can, I've learned some things listening to you guys, made a few notes about good topics for me to explore in our podcast about Alpine and our social media feeds. So knowing the things that are pain points, for the parks, we want to address those, very much so, because we, you guys are the reason that people come to see us, and we love you. So we want to help if we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good, I think that's a really good way that we should kind of move forward, is doing a little more partnering with you guys and the other tourism organizations to develop that sort of like where we don't need to really spend too much more in terms of getting people down here. Now we need to work with the people that are coming here and to get that message out in advance. So I think that's definitely a good direction. I've heard others talking about sort of that approach as well. So I do think that could work. I like it.
Yeah, and it might help if we can develop some materials about this stuff and make sure that all the visitor centers in the approaching communities have that stuff as well. Because once they get to the parks, they're looking to be in the park, and they don't want to read a bunch of signs. And, some people will because they're interested, but maybe as they're stopping in Alpine or they're stopping in Marathon or whatever, maybe we can distribute some of this, before you head down. Maybe we can intervene at some other locations. Who knows?
I like that idea. I like that approach a lot. I think it's time that we need to refocus for sure what we're trying to accomplish at this point.
Well, and one of the questions in the chat actually kind of plays on this, saying, is there a better way to get information out about Leave No Trace in the park? And when have you seen that this education works best? And so I think one of the things is we would obviously love to have your resources on the TREAD website, but I guess thinking of those other partners and ways to educate folks. And so I think a follow-up question to that in my mind is, when it comes to these visitors, are they local, like native to Texas, or are these out of towners? And so maybe then it's kind of thinking outside of communicating in Texas, some of the folks who know that Texas is on the map and it's a great place to come visit, and kind of partnering with folks beyond that. And if it's at the federal level, or maybe I'm not sure, but I'm curious as to if you even know the type of visitor. Are they a Texan? Are they out of state? Is it a combination?
I don't know that we have good data. I mean, we take that information, but I don't have a personal sense of that. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it sort of, statistically drawn out or anything like that. But I don't know the answer to that. Rick?
Yeah, and the question is, are where the new folks are coming from? I mean, Alpine historically, about 85% of our visitation is from in-state, and we haven't seen that really change. But Alpine's isn't getting all the same folks who come to the national park and the state park.
I get the sense they're coming from all over. It might be a little more skewed toward Texas, but I don't know.
Yeah, so we traditionally get about 50% of our annual visitation from in-state, and so we usually focus a lot of that outreach to our in-state clients, if you will, customers. But there's absolutely no question that what we've been seeing for the last year is a huge increase in out-of-state, and just all over the place. When we sit at the gate and talk to, have to manage the traffic, or when we close the Chizos Basin and have to manage the traffic flow, we just stand there and talk to people, and overwhelmingly they're from out of state. So there's been a significant increase here from folks, and I mean all over the United States. So how we market to them, again, I don't know. I'm gonna guess social media, those kinds of things. And it's funny, we track, what gets the most likes, and it's the pretty pictures. So, somehow we've got to figure out how to match pretty pictures on social media with really critical messages about ecotourism and being smart. So that's that's kind of my anecdotal message. But traditionally, Big Bend National Park has always, had a huge in-state visitation, unlike any other national park I've worked at.
Well, that concludes most of our questioning. So if anyone else in the audience has a question, you can put it in the chat box. We do have some comments to the panelists, so thank you for providing some of that information. But does anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask? I'm not seeing any, but if you do have questions, like I said at the beginning of the chat is my contact information and our website, and I'm happy to follow up. And as I previously mentioned, all of you who attended, we will have the TRED Talk recorded and providing some additional resources that can be available to you. And then I can also help you connect with all of our panelists for this evening. So with that, let's see if there's anything else. I don't think so. Well, I appreciate this is a great discussion. So I really thank you for participating, and for all of those who attended. As I mentioned, you'll be receiving additional resources. Amber, Chris, Rick, thank you so much for your time and your insight on this special part of Texas. And I really appreciate everyone who was able to join us. And for more information on Big Bend and future TRED Talks, you can visit us on our website at treadcoalition.org and follow us on social media. So with that, if there isn't anything else, I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and thanks again.
You too, thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Of course. Thank you.